أزهر العجائب.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا مولانا حبيب الله العالمين أبو القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين ولعنة الله على القوم الظالمين من الأولين والآخرين. Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah to everybody who is watching. If you're in the Zoom call, or if you're watching live on Facebook, or if you're watching on the Monthly Reflections podcast, Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for joining the Nahj al-Balagha book club. A question. Imagine you are a salesman who travels around selling perfume to people. When do you stop to open the perfume and feel the fragrance yourself? And this is how Shaykh Mutahhiri introduces Nahj al-Balagha. This fragrance that we have, we praise this book so much and we honor it and we speak about its ta'rif. But when will we open it to experience ourselves the fragrance of the words, of the sayings, of the speeches and the sermons of Ali bin Abi Talib? In that spirit, welcome to the Nahj al-Balagha book club. This session and the series of events over the next 10 sessions are designed to give everyone an opportunity to build a direct relationship to the words of Imam Ali. No intermediary, no need for majlis, no scholar, no separate books, just you and the words of your Imam. And the structure of these sessions is designed in such a way that each week you will be able to understand a different theme of Nahj al-Balagha, which the Imam is trying to teach us, and find value in our lives from it, inshallah. One of the issues we're facing at the moment is that there's a disconnect between me and my Imam. And one of the potential ways or solutions to this issue is to know who my Imam is, what is his personality, his behavior, how does he speak, and what issues does he speak and what issues does he not. But when it comes to Nahj al-Balagha, it is a book which exists in everyone's home. It is there in the house of every Shi'i alongside the Quran, and maybe Sayf al-Sajjadiyya, you will find Nahj al-Balagha. But what you won't find are people who have built a relationship to it where they know more than a few sayings or sermons from it. And we keep hearing that we need to build a relationship, But when will we? If you think to yourself of how much you have heard about this book and how much it's been praised, how much of that praise have I taken into actually taking responsibility for learning about my Imam through this book? I'll give you a few examples, okay? Khutbah Shaqshaqiyya, probably the most famous and repeated sermon of Nahj al-Balagha that we have, right? We hear it a lot. Can we name another sermon to ourselves beyond this khutbah? There's something like 245 sermons. This one has a name. Many others have names. What are those names? Another example. We hear a lot of that famous khutbah al-Gharra in which Imam is speaking and his companion Hammam is listening, and the Imam is listing the different qualities of who are the muttaqi, who are the mu'mineen, who are the believers, and he's going through these different lists. And all of us have heard that while he's speaking, Hammam, his body starts to shake and tremble as he is hearing these different qualities of the believer. And the Imam stops, and Hammam says, "No, Imam, please keep speaking, continue." And the Imam continues reading, and Hammam's body is having more and more of an effect. The hadith say that he starts to sweat just hearing the words of the Imam. So much so, the more the Imam reads, the more the sweat intensifies on his body and the violent shaking continues until he stops for a second, and they turn and they see that he has died out of the experience of hearing the words of Ali bin Abi Talib. I've heard this narration so many times. You have. I've recited it. But what are those qualities that were actually listed in the sermon? What are they? What is the content by which the effect came? We are so in love with the effect of Nahj al-Balagha, with the fragrance we are selling to others. When do we turn it upon ourselves? Another example. Many of us know that there is a speech of Imam Ali alayhi salam in which there is no dot used whatsoever. Many of us know there's a speech of the Imam in which there is no alif used in the entire sermon. In fact, he actually gave it just extempo. He didn't prepare, he just spoke. And if you see on paper, it's a very strange thing for the eye to see an entire sermon with no dot or another one with no alif. Okay, This is amazing. This is a miracle for sure. This is Nahj al-Balagha. This is the peak of eloquence. But when did we actually read the sermon to see what he said? So if I'm impressed already with the effect that, mashallah, there's a sermon with no dot, a sermon with no alif. But what was said in the sermon which makes this so amazing? What was the content? These are all ways in which we have to realize that I love Imam Ali and I love his book or the books which compile his words, and I have muhabba for him as a person. But if there's a gap between me and him, have I taken the steps to fill it with understanding? Because Nahj al-Balagha and this book is Imam al-Bayan. It is the leader of that which is said, of that which is told. In fact, we have some praise which says, Kalimatul Imam, Imamun Kalima. The words of the Imam, what has been said by the Imam, is itself the Imam of words. The words of the Imam are so great that they act as a hujjah upon all of other words. There are no words like the words of Amir al-Mu'mineen. The Nahj al-Balagha book club is a space and it's a platform every week, inshallah, on a Wednesday at this time, 7:30 UK time, in which we can come together and go through and actually engage directly with this book. We'll become in the habit of spending our week listening to the words of the Imam, or myself going on my phone on the Nahj al-Balagha app and reading a sermon or a speech or a saying and pondering on it, or having a relationship with the actual book, which I know exists in everyone's home. Let me go to that book, open it, and read different sermons and reflect on what the Imam is saying. Once we have this relationship, we will find, inshallah, that the themes of Imam Ali alayhi salam in Nahj al-Balagha are directly relevant to our lives. One of our scholars, Ayat al-Mutahri, says there are universal principles in this book that if you apply them, they will affect your life. They will change the way that we behave. And what we've been saying for a long time will actually realize and manifest in our behavior. For this reason, we also need to revert to experts, because it's not enough just to read Nahj al-Balagha and not think and link this with the scholarship available to us. And so each week, inshallah, I will introduce the words and the views of different ulama who have helped us unpack the meaning of the words of the Imam. Because you will find that the words of the Imam, like the Quran and other words of Ahlul Bayt, sometimes require a great level of understanding to know exactly what the Imam is trying to say to me. Sometimes it's clear. A man is either your brother in faith or your equal in humanity. We know how powerful this is. Sometimes it's not so easy. And we need scholars to help us understand what is said by the Imam. That's why we will use different literature. I'll give you an example. Again, Ayatollah Mutahriya I'll mention because of my affection to him. He says a story that once he was traveling, I think he was on a bus or he was going on a long journey, and by chance, he disembarked on one of the stops and he met someone who turned out to be a teacher who helped him travel the path of understanding Nahj al-Balagha with such depth and with such beauty. He says, I wish someone had introduced the Quran to me in the way that I learned Nahj al-Balagha from this person, who was Haj Ali Mirza Noori Shirazi, the scholar. He says, I wish that I would find Quran the way I found Nahj al-Balagha. I'll give you another example. Mullah Asghar, the famous Khoja scholar, he says that when I was younger, I used to enjoy reading Shakespeare very much. And there were certain plays, as good as it gets, he mentions that I love this play of Shakespeare, and I would really, go deeper into these words. But my teacher was not that good. And it's only when I found a better teacher that I appreciated Shakespeare more and I fell in love with literature. He says, in the same way, I used to read Nahj al-Balagha and hear about it from people around me. But it's only when I went directly to it that my scholars were more influential and important in teaching it back to me, because I found a teacher. I found a teacher who could break down the words for me. Now, our teachers for Nahj al-Balagha are the different scholars who have explained different sections to us. I have outlined 9 themes of Nahj al-Balagha. And of the subsequent 9 nights, each of us, we will select one theme, and I will give a sermon or a letter or a saying and allow you to go and just read the words of the Imam And then when you come the following week, when everyone has done their reading, we'll discuss and we'll reflect. What did you learn about the words of Ali bin Abi Talib? How did it affect you? How do you understand this theme more? I'll go through the themes. And then I will introduce the views of our ulama and our scholars, which will help us to link these themes directly to our lives. Today, I'm going to go through what those themes are. But before that, I would like to go through the history of how we have Nahj al-Balagha. What is this book? How did we get it? Where did it come from? And then I will ask you a question, which is, what do you want from your imam? And I would ask, like to, consider that you answer this question. In reading Nahj al-Balagha, what do you want that you don't have? What do you think are the key priorities which we need right now that we are not getting from Ahl al-Bayt and our relationship to them? What do we need to change in order to get that relationship? Now, reading Nahj al-Balagha is one example, but I will ask this to all of you. And after I go through what is Nahj al-Balagha and how did we get here, I will ask you this question. What do we need that we are lacking in our relationship to Ahl al-Bayt? Okay, but we'll get to that point. First of all, I would like to go through the history of Nahj al-Balagha and see how it is that we have this book and how much effort has gone into producing a book that we have so easily in our homes. Now, if you're on this Zoom call, you have any opportunity, if you want, you can write in the chat any questions or reflections any time. And similarly, if you want to speak, you can raise your hand and one of the, either I will see it or someone will see, and you can speak. Unmute your mic, put your video on. This is a free space for you, inshallah. And if you're watching now live on Facebook and you have not yet joined, please join the Zoom link so you can join the discussion. But if not, you can write a comment in the Facebook page, and then someone will read it, and then one of the moderators will send it to me, inshallah, and then I can answer or we can consider. But let's now, before we get there, dive into Nahj al-Balagha. How do we get this book? What is this book? How do we get from the words of the Imam, the infallible Imam, to a book that exists in our lives and in our homes? Imam Ali alayhi salam, as all of you know, lived during the time of the early classical period of Islam and died around 40 years after Hijrah. Now, in his life, the Imam gave many speeches, sometimes in the times of warfare, sometimes in his own life, in terms of his day-to-day life, and preaching and teaching to his companions, to his friends, either when he's a Khalifa or when he is in opposition to the regime, but he is just speaking and teaching. Imam sends many letters. He sends letters to his friends like Malik al-Ashtar or his son Imam al-Hassan, or he sends letters to his enemies like Muawiyah, the purpose of which we will see later is to communicate certain key messages to different people. And the Imam has sayings, short sayings, some which we share on WhatsApp all the time, which contain such depth and gravity and eloquence that they become very impactful for us. All of this is said within the life of the Imam of about 60 years, and he dies in around 40 years after Hijrah. When he dies, and during the time shortly after his death, all of you will know that there was a severe campaign against Imam Ali. Either there was the cursing of his name on the mimbar of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or his lovers and followers were not allowed to do dhikr of the Imam, like Misam al-Tammar, or in other cases, you were not allowed to openly express being a lover of Ali ibn Abi Talib. So much so that it's only when our 8th Imam later on in his life is able to speak in a public platform that he reintroduces the dhikr of Ali ibn Abi Talib from the mimbar. Otherwise, it wasn't something which you could do. For that reason, in the early years of Islam, you don't have many collections or accounts of the words of Ali ibn Abi Talib put together. They simply don't exist. We have one or two very rare occasions, like that of Zayn bin Wahab al-Jihni, which he died in the year 90 years after Hijrah. He does compile some of the words of the Imams, but it's very small. Similarly, Abu Mikhnaf, the great scholar who compiles the Maqtal of Imam al-Hussein and teaches us what happened in Ashura and Karbala, he's one of the sources we have. He also has a collection of the words of Imam Ali alayhi salam, but again, it's minimal because there wasn't as much freedom then to speak. It's only until the end of the time of Banu Umayyah and the beginning of Banu Abbas that we start having a little bit of a gap in which we can learn about Ali bin Abi Talib. So the final Khalifa of Banu Umayyah, Abdul Hamid bin Yahya, he has a famous saying where he says, I have memorized 70 sermons of Ali bin Abi Talib. You couldn't say that earlier, but now you can. Now we come to the 2nd century after Hijrah. Now we have examples of calligraphy and art where the words of Imam Ali alayhi salam have been woven into different forms of poetry and architecture. It's increasing. We have some scholars like Ibn Muqaffa who are now teaching and sharing the sermons of Imam Ali alayhi salam. It's happening. And we have different fihrist. Fihrist is a kind of bibliography by Sheikh al-Tusi and Ibn Nadim, where they mention a number of very early texts which don't exist anymore for different reasons, which were attempts at compiling the words of Imam Ali and bringing them together. But it's only when you come to the 3rd and 4th century after Hijrah that we start seeing actual books which mention the words of Imam Ali alayhi salam. Until then, it was oral transmission, it was speaking, it was poetry, it was discussing. There weren't books which were being written. But now we come to the 3rd century. We come to Al-Jahiz, who has a book called Al-Bayan wa Tabyan, in which he attempts to bring together the words of the Imam. We have at that time Uyun al-Akhbar, the book of Daynuri, and Gharib al-Hadith, another book of Daynuri, which is an attempt to bring these things together. We have Tarikh al-Yaqubi, a famous collection of history and encyclopedia, which we have, which we even use today, which was compiled in the 3rd century after Hijrah. And then other smaller books which do show that people were trying. Akhbar al-Ta'wal and Kitab al-Mubarad are very early accounts like this. But now, when we come to the 4th century after Hijrah, our great scholars have at their disposal the words of Imam Ali for their books. Now we have Tarikh al-Tabari, the great book of history of Tabari. Now we have Tukhfatul Aqul. Now we have Kitab al-Kafi. Now we have the books of Sheikh Suduq. Now we have different books which have come together, which are now key to our aqaid now. And now we have one book by Mas'ud called Muruj al-Dhahab, which does compile the sayings of the Imams, a version of which exists today. Where are we? 4th century. It's only been 400 years after the hijrah of Rasulullah. And now we come, after all these different collections, to the birth of 2 brothers, Sharif Radhi and Sharif Murtada. Sharif Radhi, who is the younger of the 2, was born in the year 359, and he is the one who will go on to compile Nahj al-Balagha. All of you have heard the name of Sharif Radhi and Sharif Murtada, 2 great sons, and all of you know a famous story in which this great scholar Sheikh al-Mufid falls asleep, and in a dream he sees Sayyidah Fatima Zahra sallallahu alayha come to him in a dream, and she says to him, "Teach my sons," and she's holding 2 boys with him. Now Sheikh Mufid thinks, this is Sayyidah Fatima telling me to teach her sons. He wakes up and he's very worried at this notion, and he's very concerned at what it could mean and who he is to be of service in this way. And when he wakes up the next day, a lady comes and says, "Ya Sheikh, will you teach my sons?" And he understands that it is these sons who Sayyidah Fatima wants him to educate. One is Al-Radhi, one is Murtada. Sharif Murtada goes on to become a great jurist, especially in fiqh and usul, and even now his opinions are discussed in the Hawza. Sharif Radhi, the other son, is very much interested in poetry and language. He studies history under Tabari and other scholars, but what he really likes is language and eloquence. And of course, he has love for Ahlul Bayt. One day, he is compiling a new book. He has 40 books in his name. And the book is called Khasais al-Aimma, the stories of the Imams. And so in compiling this book, his plan, right, is that he's going to bring together all the words of the Imams and bring them together. And not just all the words which he understands the eloquence and the linguistic brilliance of these words. So he's going to go for the first Imam, second Imam, third Imam, fourth Imam, and just bring together the most eloquent sayings they have. So he starts. And of course, the first Imam, Imam Ali alayhi salam, he brings together many of his sermons, many of his sayings, and he's ready to move on to the next one, the next Imam, Imam al-Hassan. His friends read what he's done so far, and they say to him, what you have brought together, what you have compiled, already the sayings of Ali bin Abi Talib are so brilliant and so magnificent. We would wish that you expand more on Ali bin Abi Talib, spend more time on him, get more letters, more sermons, bring it together. If we were to have a book like this, how much value it would bring to our lives. So Sharif Radhi decides this is a good idea. And instead of doing the rest of the Imams, he focuses intensely on Imam Ali alayhi salam. And by the year 400 years after Hijrah, he finishes what is known as the peak of eloquence, Nahj al-Balagha. And in this book, he finds many, new revelations about the Imam. And the book contains 245 sermons, 75 unique letters or individual letters, and 200 sayings of Imam Ali, which now exist in the form that we have today. He did not compile everything. He just compiled those that he had an interest in terms of eloquence. We have one narration which says that there were 480 sermons which existed before him. And he only took 245 and made them into Nahj al-Balagha. Why? Why not the rest of them? Because this is not a work of hadith, it's a work of eloquence and of language. And he chose those sermons which were most valuable in terms of language for us. So when we go to Nahj al-Balagha, the sayings we're going to see, inshallah, are the most eloquent of Ali ibn Abi Talib, but they're not everything. Another example, Sheikh Sharif al-Radhi compiles Nahj al-Balagha. He's got about 200 sayings that he's got. Many times me and you, when we see sayings from Ali alayhi salam being shared or being discussed, they're not from Nahj al-Balagha. They're from other books. For example, the book Al-Ghurar al-Hikam by Sheikh Ahmadi came just after Nahj al-Balagha. It has 11,000 sayings of Imam Ali alayhi salam. Nahj al-Balagha, 200. Why? Because Sharif Radhi wanted to focus on a certain type of saying. He didn't always give the chain. Sometimes he left blank spaces in the original book to fill in thoughts later. He gives his commentary, but he focuses on how do I compile the most eloquent words of Ali bin Abi Talib together. So there's this book, fine. Everyone appreciates this book. Even during his life, people start commenting and writing sharh, commentary of Nahj al-Balagha during his life. And no one questions the brilliance of this book. 150 years later, we start seeing some people argue against Nahj al-Balagha. Not at the time, after. So it's at this time that we have Ibn Khallaqan's famous refutation of Nahj al-Balagha. He argues that this is not a book by the Imam. It's a book by Sharif Radhi or Sharif Murtada, not Radhi, his brother, but it can't be the Imam. He says things like, it's not clear where the words of the Imam end and where the words of Sharif Radhi continue. But our scholars have answered, the words of Ali ibn Abi Talib are so brilliant, they would be light in a room full of darkness. Just like the words of Quran stand out to the eye, so do the words of Imam Ali alayhi salam. But this was his objection. Then al-Dhahabi comes, the Sunni scholar. He also argues that the Imam would not speak like this, because for Sunnis, they see Nahj al-Balagha and they see, for example, Shaqshaqiyya, which we mentioned. And the Imam speaks so with such strength and aqeedah against those who took haqq away from him and his family. And so when they see Shaqshaqiyya and how the Imam speaks about Abu Bakr and Umar, they're like, the Imam would not say this. This chain can't be there. And they start making questions about the sanad and the chain of transmission of Nahj al-Balagha. But then our scholars in their research have found there are multiple unique chains for even this sermon. Ayatollah Amini, who wrote Al-Ghadir, has, I believe, 28 different chains for this one sermon. And many scholars come together to bring together more chains to prove this book is the words of Ali ibn Abi Talib, or at least many of the sermons are indeed with a chain to the Imam. Shaykh Mutahari has 36 different original sources which Sharif Radhi used for the purpose of this book. And Sayyid Akhtar later would add 9 more to this list. However, 90% of all of the books which were used by Nahj al-Balagha, by Shaykh Radhi, don't exist anymore. They're quoted, but they're not real anymore. They're not existing around us. Either the enemy burnt down the libraries which contained them, all those books became extinct, they were not republished, or there was a campaign to destroy them, but we don't have them at the moment. What we do have is Nahj al-Balagha, the peak of eloquence, with many translations and versions, which has found many commentaries from Sunni and Shia. The most famous commentary of Nahj al-Balagha is Sharh ibn Abil Hadid by a Sunni Mu'tazilite thinker. One of the places where the most research has been done of Nahj al-Balagha is in Egypt by Al-Azhar University, Sunni. Many non-Muslim thinkers in the West have also written about Nahj al-Balagha. Thomas Clearly, a famous translator in the late 20th century, late 20th century, and the book was published later on, has a commentary of Nahj al-Balagha called Selections of Divine Grace. Professor Gleave, Robert Gleave, has spoke at a conference of this topic of non-Muslims and Nahj al-Balagha. But then you have non-Muslim thinkers who are against Nahj al-Balagha. There is a debate happening right now amongst Western academics about whether this book even belongs to Ali bin Abi Talib. And on that side, you have thinkers like Clayman and Brockelman who argue against it. And then on our side, you have much research happening right now of scholars, not only proving these are the words of Ali bin Abi Talib, but proving that Nahj al-Balagha is not just a book for academics. It's not just a book for scholars. It's not just a book for people of knowledge and people of expertise. This is a book for everyone. And just like Ayat al-Mutahari says, this book is universal in its application. Pick up any of the sermons and letters in their context, and we can learn something from them. And that is the purpose of the Nahj al-Balagha book club. All of us now, inshallah, have an opportunity over the next 9 sessions to pick up this book and to learn from it, inshallah. Okay, that's a little bit of a history of about, I don't know, about 1,500, 600 years of how we got Nahj al-Balagha. We have it now. The question is, how do we study it? What's our method? And what do the next 9 weeks look like? But before I get there, I would like to ask, are there any questions right now about Nahj al-Balagha, about what I mentioned? Please use the Zoom chat or raise your hand if you are a participant in this Zoom call. And, inshallah, I'll see you. And you can ask a question, or you can turn your video off and you can ask. There is no problem. And if you're using Facebook, you can please write a message. Any questions about Nahj al-Balagha, anything you'd like to know? Anything that was not clear, I'm happy to explain. If there is nothing, then I'll ask that question now that I was going to ask you, which is, as a community, and you can, as a community, you can ponder and think about this issue. What do we need from Ahl al-Bayt that we are not getting already? So we have books like Nahj al-Balagha, we have the Imams. What are we not doing enough that we need to improve? Please do answer this question and think to yourself, how can we build a better relationship to the knowledge of Ahl al-Bayt? If you have an experience that you'd like to share, or a reflection or a point, please do, please do write it. Please do discuss it with us. We have a question I'm seeing in the chat, which is, how long did it take to write Nahj al-Balagha? According to the research that I did, he finished it in 400. He began in 300, and so about 6 years that I have in the actual compilation. The research might have taken longer, but 6 years in bringing everything together is how long it took for Sharif Radi to compile Nahj al-Balagha. Are there any questions or thoughts in general? And let me ask all of you again, because you're from the community that you're in, how do we build a better relationship to the knowledge of Ahl al-Bayt? Who has any suggestions or ideas? Somebody has written, one way that we can build a relationship is to follow their footsteps. That is a good point. Thank you, Agha. Following the footsteps of Ahl al-Bayt and actually acting how they acted. Because in Nahj al-Balagha, you're going to see there are many examples where the Imam demonstrates why he does certain things. Like, why does he take certain actions? Why do he take certain decisions? And maybe when I'm in a similar position to that, I can make similar decisions to the Imam, or I can allow what the Imam has said to affect my decision making. So this is a good point. We need to follow the footsteps of the Imams, and maybe we're not doing that right now, or not doing it enough. Thank you, Said Muhammad Ali, for this point. Any other points? What should we be doing more to follow the knowledge of Ahl al-Bayt? How can we improve? Jazakallah, Said Muhammad. What do we think? This is a book club, so later on when I'm giving texts, I hope that we can have some feedback, inshallah. So what can we do to improve knowledge of Ahl al-Bayt? How can we learn more from Ahl al-Bayt? Why is it important? Somebody's asked a question. I'll mention the point first. Understanding the reasoning behind each saying and action. This is a very nice point, Sister Zahra. One way we can gain more knowledge of Ahl al-Bayt is to know the reasoning behind each saying and action of maybe the Imam or of us. Do you mean the reasoning behind what we do, or the reasoning behind what the Imam does? Could you explain which one you mean? Their actions. Okay, I agree. Because sometimes with Ahl al-Bayt, what we do is we glorify Ahl al-Bayt without seeing Ahl al-Bayt. So we might find something very impressive in the Imams, without knowing why it's impressive. I'll give you a very easy example. Can the Imams sin? Okay? Can the Imams do a sin? Now, if a person says there's no possibility theologically for the Imam to commit a sin, theologically, I mean, they are ma'soom in such a way that they can't even do sin if it's not even possible for them, then what is so impressive when they don't sin? What what do I learn from that? Because I can sin. My Imam, if he can't sin and he doesn't, then what can I learn from that? But it's when the Imams say that we can see the temptation of this dunya, but it is dirty to us the way impurity is dirty to you. That's why we refrain from it. We understand, oh, see, the Imams, they can see, they can understand why there's attraction, but they just never choose to be close to it. That's the beauty of the Imams. There are so many occasions where we praise the wrong thing. It's not impressive that Ali bin Abi Talib decided to stay behind in the time of Mi'raj when the Prophet was going ahead. It's impressive that he slept at the time of Mi'raj. Anyone can go with the Prophet into a cave, but not anyone can be at peace in their heart following the Prophet. We need to find where is the actual dhikr of the Imam and where is something which sounds great to the ear but isn't the real praise. So that was a very beautiful point from you, not from me. Sister has a point which is understand the Quran and reflect as they were the talking and living Quran. A wonderful point by Sister Labbaik ibn Zahra. So maybe it's a sister. Lovely point. We need to understand the Quran and reflect as the Imams are Quran natiq. Nahj al-Balagha is a great example. Many of you have heard that in the Battle of Siffin, the enemies are coming to the Imam carrying pages of Quran on their spears. Like we hear this all the time. And the Imam says that I am the speaking Quran. So don't be deceived by the fact that Quran's on their spears. Listen to me. In Nahj al-Balagha, there are examples where the Imam speaks like this, that I will teach you about the Quran. He says in one khutbah, knowledge is flowing from my hands. I have knowledge which is as if a rope dangling in deep wells. I am more aware of the skies than of the earth. Ask me, use me while you have me. And because you mentioned Quran quite beautifully, brother or sister, the Quran is mentioned so many times in Nahj al-Balagha, and the way that the Imam uses Quran helps us understand what the Quran actually means by how he speaks about it. So that's a beautiful point, and inshallah we can ponder on this. Somebody has asked, is there a tafsir of Nahj al-Balagha which cross-references with the Quran? A beautiful point. There is a work by Ayatollah Nasir Makarim Shirazi which does this, which narrates different verses of Quran from Nahj al-Balagha to the Quran. So that's an answer to that question, and I will mention it later. Brother Irshad has written, we are in awe when listening to the sayings of the Imams, but we fall short in practicing their sayings. Let me ponder more, inshallah, definitely, on how we can put their sayings into action and more often. I agree. And it doesn't have to be a long saying. It can be a very short saying. It doesn't need to be a very long one. I remember Maulana Ali Murtaza Zaidi went to a conference. He was narrating this once on Nahj al-Balagha. And he said that why are the communities not benefiting from this book? When we mention on Mimbar, people don't like these long sermons on Mimbar Imam al-Hussein. They want a different approach. Why? And the answer was we should focus on sayings, small sayings all of us can remember. And then people in their lives can slowly unpack it in practice. So if I say to you something like, the Imam says that cheerfulness is the bond of friendship. That is enough for you to think, how do I treat my friends? Am I cheerful? Should I be more cheerful? How do I practice this? But if I mention a long saying on friendship, that's not something that goes into the heart. That's why Al-Jahiz, one of the older scholars, once said that there's this one saying of Ali bin Abi Talib where he says that the value of a person is their knowledge. I have spent ages thinking about this one saying. So I'm hoping in the Nahj al-Balagha book club, if I mention one or two small sayings, we can spend the rest of our week thinking and pondering on it, inshallah. Sister Shabana has written, we should concentrate on the teaching and practices of Ahlul Bayt, rather tailored according to our cultural practice. A very beautiful point. It is the teachings of Ahlul Bayt which should be our source, not our cultural practices. Indeed. And what do we do when we find something in Nahj al-Balagha which the Imam is teaching me, which is different to what my culture taught me? That's a real test. What do I choose? Do I choose the words of my Imam, or do I choose what's easy in my community? And I believe that the Imam wants from us strength. In one hadith, he says that keep your feet firm like mountains when he's telling his followers to go to war. Be firm, be strong. In one very beautiful khutbah, he's speaking about a friend, but he doesn't mention who it is. He says, I had a friend once. It's a very beautiful sermon. I encourage all of you to research this. It begins, I had a friend once, and inshallah you can read it. It's a very beautiful saying. Somebody has unmuted. Did you have a point you wanted to make or not? No, okay. Another point is, how can we bring about this change? Thank you, Brother Irshad. We can bring about this change, inshallah, by focusing on the knowledge of the Imam in a platform which is educational, right? A platform built for education, and spending some time in our week or spending some time reading or pondering in a structured way. Because many times we read a message on maybe WhatsApp or Facebook or online, or we hear a section of a lecture and it sounds great, but we don't have a plan for how to implement that. So having a block or a project or a kind of structured way of learning is more in line with how our minds work. If we would send our children to school and give them a textbook for different subjects, why don't we give them a textbook for their religion and their deen, right? So that's how we should inshallah try. Our madras should be focused, Sister has said, on Nahj al-Balagha and practical life to implement Quran and Ahlul Bayt. I agree. I think the reason why we don't have more Nahj al-Balagha in majalis is because what we do have are certain sound bites which people love. Shaqshaqiyya I mentioned, and others where we hear them a lot and they're great. Other aspects of Nahj al-Balagha require a little bit more contemplation, and they can't be packaged up into 5 or 6 minute segments and you move on. They require a bit more focus, because if we're going to take the words of the Imam seriously, we should think about him. And if we have love for the Imam, he deserves us to gain knowledge, for which lover does not wish for knowledge of their beloved? And I think in Majlis, because we are focusing on things like Azar and things like sending certain clear messages, we don't have the space for deeper contemplation, usually. So I hope that this platform and other platforms that we have can allow for that discussion. Okay, thank you so much for your great comments, everyone, inshallah. I'm glad that we recognize there's definitely a need for more knowledge of Ahlul Bayt. And let me explain to you what I propose, if you are with me. And if you think that I would like to focus more on the words of my Imam, please give me your time for the next 9 sessions, next 9 weeks, inshallah, at this time on a Wednesday. Here's what I propose, okay? I have in front of me a list of 9 themes of Nahj al-Balagha. There are many, but these 9 are important, are topical, are relevant for our lives, and there is sufficient scholarly attention which can help us to unpack them with ulama who give us really good advice on how to link it to our lives. Every week, I will set maybe like a reading of 1 or 2 like sermons of Nahj al-Balagha or letters. And I will ask that you read it, come to the next session, having read it, thinking about what you think the Imam means here, and we'll discuss. We'll share reflections on that point, and we'll explore the theme based on our own views of that particular text of the Nahj al-Balagha. Here are the 9 themes we're going to go through. Firstly, Nahj al-Balagha and Tawheed and Aqaid. So here we are going to look, inshallah, at how does Ali look at Allah, because you have that narration that there are none who know Allah like Ali and Muhammad, and none who know Muhammad like Ali and Allah, and none know Ali like Allah and Muhammad. But truthfully, the way that Imam Ali speaks about Allah, if I thought about Allah how he speaks about him in Nahj al-Balagha, my prayer would be different. My religion would be different. I would not be the same person that I am. Who is Allah? How does he answer du'as? What are his qualities? What is his essence? What are his attributes? How do I thank him? How does he treat me? How do his actions work? This is understanding Tawheed in the eyes of Ali ibn Abi Talib. Okay, that's the first theme. Second theme, Irfan, mysticism. If I wish to go on that journey in which I am trying to detach from these material attractions and unify with the beloved and become at one with Allah, which parts of Nahj al-Balagha inspire that desire to walk the path of sayr and suluk, that path of tazkiyah, that path of fana? How do I use the words of Imam Ali alayhi salam, who is a man who is so deeply in love with Allah, you might forget he's also the one who's fighting on the battlefield and doing all of these amazing missions. He seems like someone who lives alone at the foot of some mountain, just contemplating on Allah, but he is both at once. But how does he teach us that irfani approach, that mysticism of Ahlul Bayt? That's the second thing we're going to go through. Third, government and justice. How does Nahj al-Balagha teach us to govern, to rule, to be just, and to establish a system of fairness amongst one another? How should I, living in the 21st century in the West, treat different political systems? What stances should I take? What opinions should I take? We use Nahj al-Balagha to understand this point. It's very sensitive for our current climate, but it's needed. The fourth theme we will look at in Nahj al-Balagha book club is morality and religious advice, decision making. How, when I'm in this situation, does my Imam want me to act? And when I'm in that situation, how does he want me to act? And in that situation, how does he want me to act? We'll go through Nahj al-Balagha and we'll find different, very practical approaches from the Imam of when you're with these people, behave like this. And when you're in this feeling, act like this, so that my decision making can become more religious, inshallah, and religious in the way the Imam wants me to. Okay, that's morality. Fifth, dunya. Our scholars say no topic is discussed more in Nahj al-Balagha than this world, than attraction to dunya, than love for this dunya. So the question is, how do I use Nahj al-Balagha to detach myself from the negative parts of this world and identify how I can use this dunya for my deen? And when can I identify the attraction of dunya on my soul? Okay, that's the fifth one. Sixth, women's rights. So many people have mentioned parts of Nahj al-Balagha which indicate negative views towards women from the vision of Islam. Is this true? And when we face challenges from other ideologies and other schools of thought and other bodies of thought, like liberalism and feminism and these ideas, how does Islam link with them? How does my Imam want me to act with them? And when I come across parts of Nahj al-Balagha which look like we are making women look disparaged or weak or oppressed, do I believe this? Is this really what my Imam said? How do I address these issues? That is the sixth theme of women's rights. 7, Imamat and Khilafah. How does the Imam treat the Khulafa of his day? How does the Imam develop the system of Imamat whilst being under oppression in his life? So much so that when it comes to Sunni and Shia relations today, how can I use Nahj al-Balagha and the words of the Imam to know how I, as a Shia, should act with a Sunni? And how do we act with issues like taqiyya? How do we deal with that issue? When a movie comes out about a member of Ahlul Bayt in a way that we are not sure how to react, how does Imam want us to react to it? When there are debates and fights and arguments with Sunnis, when there is Shia genocide happening, how does my Imam want me to use Imamah to my strength? This will be the 7th theme. 8th, prophethood. Like we mentioned earlier, no one knows Rasulullah like Imam Ali alayhi salam, the way the Imam grew up with him. So let's look at how Imam Ali speaks about the Holy Prophet. Ayatollah Khamenei here has a good book, a collection which helps us in this regard. How do I understand the Holy Prophet from the eyes of Ali bin Abi Talib? That is the 8th theme, and it's very important for us, by the way, to know the Prophet from the eyes of someone who is familiar with him, who grew up with him. And who knows the Prophet more than Imam Ali alayhi salam? And 9th, Quran. Some people have mentioned already. How do I understand Quran from the eyes of Ali bin Abi Talib? How do I understand Nahj al-Balagha from the eyes of Quran? There are two different things. Because one of our scholars says that Nahj al-Balagha is offspring of the Quran. It comes from the Quran. How is this true? When I read the book of Allah, since Shahr Ramadan, have I even picked that book up since then? When I do, how does Nahj al-Balagha help me to build a relationship to Quran? All right. These are the 9 themes which we will all go through over the next 9 sessions. Maybe not in this order. Nahj al-Balagha and Tawheed, Irfan, government and justice, morality and decision making, dunya, women's rights, imamat and khilafah, prophethood and Quran. Each night a different theme. Next week, which is the following Wednesday, inshallah, at this time, we are looking at Nahj al-Balagha and Allah and Tawheed. And for this, I would like everyone, inshallah, if you are willing, to read Sermon 1 of Nahj al-Balagha. It is the most brilliant way of speaking about Allah, Sermon 1. And it's not long, maybe a page and a half max, because only read until the creation of the human beings. You don't have to read further than that. So in this sermon 1, Imam Ali al-Islam says, who is Allah? He has a very famous khutbah which many people recite in majlis about the words of Allah. Read it. Then he speaks about what has Allah done for me. Then he speaks about how does Allah create? How does he create angels? How does he create human beings? I would like you just to read until how he creates angels. No need to create human beings, but if you're interested, you can keep reading. And next Wednesday, when we gather, inshallah, I will ask you, or you can, if you wish to share, you can. And if not, I'll go through views of ulama. How does Ali ibn Abi Talib see Allah? That he says that how can I worship a Lord who I cannot see? And how can I link that discussion, inshallah, to how I see Allah? Okay, there's a link now in the chat to the sermon. You can click it, you can save it. The one on Al-Islam is very helpful because it's a very good translation. You can read it in Urdu, you can read it in Arabic, in any language that you wish. And then next week we will discuss it. If you don't have a chance to read, you can come inshallah and listen. I'll go through the views of ulama. But I would love for this book club to be a functioning book club. And we'll ask next week, how does Ali look at Allah? Okay, that is the end of the session, inshallah. If there are any questions or any comments, please leave them in the chat. Or you can ask them now by unmuting. Are Tawheed and Aqaid synonyms? Not exactly, but the way I'm using them, yes. Aqaid means belief. Tawheed is belief in Allah. So they're not the same thing. However, when we say Aqaid, we always mean Tawheed. Because when we say Aqaid means theology. Theology, Tawheed, it seems very similar. So they are synonymous in the way I'm using them. Tawheed, belief in Allah. Aqaid, theology. Yeah. I guess oneness of God is a better translation of Tawheed, monotheism. And theology is a good translation of Aqaid. But in the way that we're using them, Sister Zahra, they are the same thing. It's belief in Allah that we're interested in. Thank you for your question. Any other questions or comments before we end? Okay, I guess then we will see you inshallah next Wednesday as we go through Imam Ali al-Islam and the sermon 1 of Nahj al-Balagha and look at the topic of Nahj al-Balagha and Tawheed and the Qaid. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care, inshallah. Thank you. And we'll see you next week. Goodbye, everyone.